Nick Bernardi stood on the sidewalk with his wife, Kimmy. He put his arm around her waist as they looked at their new home. She stiffened at his touch, and with a glance, he saw that she still had that disconnected look on her face, the one she'd had ever since she had caught him cheating on her. He frowned as he thought, "It's been 6 months already. When is she going to forgive me? She should be past all this, especially since we just bought a freaking house together." But while Nick was frustrated, he knew that he'd brought this on himself and that it would take more time. So he decided to try and salvage this momentous day. "I hope that by making this house a real home we can heal," he said. The house was a small bungalow on Salem Street, which was lined with shade trees and antique-style street lamps. It wasn't very large, but it didn't need to be. They had been married only a year and had no children other than their Yorkie poo that they had named Mocha. When she didn't reply, he gave a small sigh and flashed her a smile, hoping she would relent and soften. But instead of returning the gesture with a smile of her own, she gave Mocha a kiss on his head as she hugged him in her arms. Mocha was adorable, with bright eyes and black and brown fur that was so curly and so soft that, at first glance, it made him look out of focus. He returned her kiss with a lick of her chin and gave a happy wag of his tail. A Mercedes pulled to the curb, and Megan Crawford got out and walked over to them. She looked more like a model for a sports clothing line instead of one of Nevermore Hollow's most successful realtors. She was dressed as if headed to a yoga class instead of doing a final walkthrough of the house. She had squeezed herself into a pair of black, stretchy leggings and wore a cropped workout tank top that had the same effect as a push-up bra. Her ample cleavage and firm midriff were on full display. Nick knew Kimmy was jealous of Megan's athletic beauty. Thus far, she had not let her jealousy metastasize, partly because in previous meetings, Megan had dressed more conservatively. But, seeing her now, dressed in such seductive attire, he knew he had to be careful not to give Kimmy any reason to doubt his new commitment to their marriage. Kimmy's eyes darted from Megan's cleavage to Nick's face, trying to determine if he was looking. Nick forced himself to keep his eyes focused on Megan's face instead of the parts of her body she was so proudly showing off. Megan shook their hands. She seemed to hold on to Nick's a heartbeat too long, and he could see Kimmy's eyes narrow just a bit before she caught herself and forced them to smile. "Well, here we are," Megan said. "A final walkthrough, and then it's all yours." She handed them each a set of keys to the doors. "Will you be moving in tomorrow?" "No," Nick said. "We'll be moving in today. Still being basically newlyweds, everything we have fit into one small moving truck, and it should be here in about an hour." "Excellent," Megan said as she removed a pink hair tie from her wrist. She used it to put her long blonde hair into a ponytail. "I just love new beginnings. Let's get started, shall we? I have a spin class after we're done here." She led them up the cobblestone walk to the front porch. Nick made sure to look up at the brightly colored fall foliage that graced the neighborhood instead of Megan's seductive wiggle. As they stepped onto the porch, he glanced over at Kimmy and gave her another smile. Kimmy frowned, then glanced at Megan's butt. Nick was disappointed to see that even Mocha seemed to frown at him. "I'm not even looking at you, you furry little mutt," he thought. As if Mocha had read his mind, he growled disapprovingly at Nick. Megan nodded at the door. "I'll allow the both of you the honor of stepping inside first." As Nick unlocked the door, Kimmy defiantly positioned herself between him and Megan. He pushed the door open and motioned for her to step inside, but she shook her head and said, "You first." Damn it, he thought. This should be a happy, exciting moment, but Kimmy's distrust is making this awkward and bringing a negative energy. He forced a smile and said, "Thank you, honey." The women followed him inside. They stood in the den. To the right was the kitchen, and just past the den, at the back of the house, were 2 bedrooms. The master was on the left, which had a door that led out onto another small porch. Nick and Kimmy had fallen in love with the house the first time they saw it. When their offer had been accepted, they spent a whole day discussing how they were going to decorate. That was the first time since the discovery of his infidelity that he felt there was any real healing between them. It had seemed as if Kimmy was starting to forgive him, until this morning as they drove into town. Nick had been behind the wheel, Kimmy in the passenger seat. The closer they had gotten to their new home, the quieter she got. Suddenly, she turned to him. "Do you think Megan is sexy?" Damn it, Nick thought. If I told you she wasn't, you would know I was lying. So yes, she's very attractive, but Kimmy, babe, I only want you. You are my world. Kimmy looked out the window. I wasn't your world when you were screwing Leela. Nick kept his frustration in check. This wasn't the first time she'd made a statement like this, but he had hoped that she was now beyond throwing it up in his face. I have apologized to you 1,000 times, honey. I can only try to prove to you that I am a new man and that you are all I want. I will never do anything like that again. Kimmy said nothing else to him until she had told him to be the first one to step inside their new home. As they stood in the unfurnished den, Nick said to Kimmy, I can't wait until the truck gets here with our stuff. I'm looking forward to putting things in order with you tonight, babe. Then we can grab a pizza from somewhere and just hang out together. What do you think? Before Kimmy could respond, Megan put her hand on Nick's arm and said, Oh, we have an amazing pizza place on Main Street. It's called Dante Inferno's Pizzeria. You're gonna love it. It's so delicious. Nick saw Kimmy's eyes dart to Megan's hand on his arm. He knew she was going to bring this up after Megan was gone. They took a few minutes to do a final walkthrough. Then Megan gave them both a hug and then left. She jogged to her Mercedes and sped away. Thankfully, before either of them could say anything, the movers arrived. They kenneled Mocha and spent the next hour helping the two beefy men unload the truck. When they were alone, Nick said, We missed lunch and it's getting dark out. You want to take a break and grab some of that pizza Megan told us about? Kimmy had looked angry the whole time they'd been unloading. She gave him an accusing glare. Do you want to grab some of Megan? From the kennel, Mocha gave a short bark as if to say, Give him hell, Mom. Nick didn't want to fight, but he was over Kimmy's attitude. I'm not going to dignify that with an answer. Do you want pizza or not? You seem to like the way she touched your arm and when she hugged you, Kimmy said. Did you like the way her body felt? Come on, honey, let's not do this. Let's not let our first night in our new home be ruined because you refuse to trust me. Kimmy's eyes were full of suspicion and anger. She unlocked the kennel for Mocha. I'm not hungry, she said, and stormed down the hallway. Mocha gave him a growl that was the canine equivalent of, You brought this on yourself, douchebag. and he followed her into the bedroom. Kimmy shut the door behind them. "Damn it," Nick said. He wanted to kick something, but he needed to de-escalate the situation. So he decided to drive to Dante Inferno's and get a pizza. Hopefully, Kimmy would be calmer when he got back. He snatched his keys from a table and started toward the door when he caught a dash of movement from the corner of his eye in the kitchen. His first thought was that it was some sort of rodent, but they'd had the house inspected prior to signing the deed and had gotten the all clear. Then he remembered that earlier he had opened the kitchen window to get rid of the fumes after using too much cleaner on the sink and counter. Maybe a squirrel had taken that opportunity to get inside the house. He stepped into the kitchen and froze as he tried to make sense of what he saw. Standing in front of the fridge, facing him, was a tiny red demon. It stood maybe 10 inches tall, had 2 small obsidian horns which matched the dark hooves on its feet, a tail that ended in a spike, and tiny needle-like fangs. Its eyes were unnaturally large, like something you'd see in Japanese animation, and it had a pudgy tummy. It winked at him. Then it scrambled up onto the counter and skittered out the window. For a long moment, Nick couldn't move. His mind tried to explain what his eyes had seen, but he failed to make sense of it. He stepped over to the sink and glanced out the window. There in the yard, the little creature stood for a moment, grinning at him, then scrambled around the back of the house. Nick shot down the hallway to the spare bedroom, which had a door that led out to the backyard. He snatched open the door just in time to see the creature scurry up a tree, across a limb that jutted out over the neighbor's house, and disappear into the twilight evening. He shut the door, shot back down the hallway to the kitchen, and slammed the window shut. Kimmy heard his bustling and stepped out of their room and gave him a look that was both perplexed and annoyed. "Why are you making all this racket? Are you mad because I saw how you and Megan seemed to be getting along so well?" "Damn it, Kimmy," he said. "That's not what's going on. There was this creature in the kitchen. It must have gotten in through the open window." Kimmy was not an outdoorsy person. Other than Mocha, she didn't like any animal, especially any that could be considered wildlife. Her expression went from accusation to concern. "You don't think it was a raccoon, do you?" "It wasn't a raccoon," he said. "It was way too small, and it looked like a—" He trailed off as a sudden thought hit him. He'd seen a picture of this creature in a book he once read about superstitions in the Dark Ages. The book had pictures of all the supernatural beings that the folk of the time believed in. And what he had seen standing in their kitchen was a small demon-like creature called an imp. "It wasn't a rat, was it?" Kimmy said. "I don't want our new home to be infested with rats." Nick shook his head. Already he was questioning what he had seen. Surely his mind had been playing tricks on him. It wasn't that," he said. "Besides, it's gone now, and I've shut the window, so we're good. Look, babe, let's start fresh and go get some pizza and come back and try to enjoy our first night together in our home. Please?" Kimmy softened at the sincerity in his voice. "Okay. And Nick, I'm sorry. I truly am, but it's only been 6 months since finding you in our bed with another woman, and it's going to take longer than that. Especially when I see someone as beautiful as Megan flirting with you." Nick didn't think that Megan had been flirting, but he let it go. I understand, babe, I do, but I promise all that is behind me. Kimmy smiled for the first time all day. It was small and uncertain, but he'd take it. Okay, she said. I appreciate that. Now, let's go and see if this Dante Inferno's is as good as its reputation. On their drive to the restaurant, Nick had an epiphany about what he'd seen in the kitchen. Their marriage counselor had suggested they both begin taking anxiety medication, stating that it might help them manage their emotions so that they could have more helpful dialogue and bring about healing. Nick had been resistant at first and had given in only after looking into the side effects, which were minimal. But he did remember that a possible side effect was hallucinations. He made a mental note to call his doctor the first thing in the morning. Feeling better about his plan, he was able to push the incident to the back of his mind and focus on his time with Kimmy. The pizzeria was smack in the middle of Main Street, which was a slice of nostalgic Americana. The street was lit with more antique-style street lamps and by strings of clear lights wrapped around the trees that were spaced about. And the decor inside Dante Inferno's could be described as a mixture of eldritch horror and surrealism. The light fixtures hanging over the booths were in the shape of writhing tentacles. The sconces on the walls were shaped like twisted claws of unknown beasts. Across the back wall was a visceral painting of demons torturing unfortunate souls. And above the door, when you entered, was a plaque with a play on the quote from the Divine Comedy. It said, "Abandon hope, all ye who dine here." While they ate, their conversation was light, hopeful, and to his mind, healing. When they got back home, Nick was surprised that she cozied up against him as they binged on their favorite show. Around 11 p.m., Kimmy decided to go to bed. They had not been intimate since she'd found out about his infidelity, and as much as he wanted her tonight, he didn't push it. So he told her he was going to stay up a bit longer. She shuffled down the hallway with Mocha padding along behind her, and she closed the door behind them. He grabbed a book and a couple beers. He drank and read while trying to relax. It took some effort because he kept thinking about Kimmy's jealousy, which led him to think about how gorgeous Megan was. But finally, around midnight, the beers kicked in and he fell into a deep sleep. At some point, he was awakened by a sound. It felt as if he were drugged, and he had to force his eyes open. He was sprawled on the couch, and on the coffee table was the imp. It sat cross-legged and held his phone in both its tiny hands. Nick tried to move, to snatch his phone, but his body was heavy, and he had no control of his arms. The imp turned its anime eyes on him and gave a devilish smile. Then, though he resisted, Nick fell back into a deep sleep. The next morning, he opened his blurry eyes to find Kimmy standing over him, holding his phone. It didn't surprise him because one of the conditions the therapist had put in place was that his phone would be available to her whenever she wanted. He pushed himself up. "Hey, babe, sorry I didn't come to bed. I fell asleep." He was going to say more, but as his sight cleared, he saw the look on her face. She looked pissed. "Why did you text Megan during the middle of the night?" she asked. Suddenly he remembered that he had seen the imp holding his phone. His mind spun as he tried to make sense of what was happening. "What do you mean?" he asked. "At 1:30 this morning, you asked her to call you," Kimmy said. Her hand was shaking from the emotions she was trying to control. "Why did you do that?" Now, fully awake and thankful that the text was as benign as it was, he came up with an excuse that he felt would work. "I was thinking about the critter I saw. I know that any infestation is supposed to be disclosed before the sale, but I wanted to speak with her just to make sure and get her advice." Kimmy's eyes remained infected with suspicion, but she relented. "Okay, I guess that makes sense, but why didn't you wait until this morning to text her? Why do it in the middle of the night?" Nick shrugged. "I drank a couple of beers after you went to bed. Due to such a long day, they hit me pretty hard. I guess I wasn't thinking it through clearly. I'll apologize to her if she calls." Kimmy seemed to accept his explanation and handed him his phone. "We have no food in the house, and I'm going to run to the store and grab something to make for breakfast. I'll call her while I'm out, and I'll speak to her about it. Does French toast sound good to you?" Nick felt a surge of hope. Kimmy had not cooked for them in months. They always ate out. "Yeah, babe, that would be great." After Kimmy left, he called his doctor, who told him that while it would be a rare occurrence to have a hallucination on his specific medication, it was possible due to the fact that he had had the alcohol on top of all the stress of moving and repairing his marriage. It was also possible that he could have texted Megan in the middle of the night as part of that hallucination. The doctor told him to eat, rest, and reduce his stress. "Doctor's orders," he said after he hung up. He laid back down on the couch until Kimmy got home. After they ate breakfast, they decided to spend the rest of the day exploring their new hometown. They visited Lovecraft Park, where for the first time in weeks, they held hands as they walked around the fountain, which was shaped like a massive squid-like creature with too many eyes. They had a late lunch at a diner on the edge of town called Winona's Waffle Hut. Then, later, as they walked down Main Street, they stopped at Pennywise Ice Cream Parlor for dessert. They got home a little after 9 p.m. and plopped down on the couch. Kimmy moved toward him and gave him a deep kiss that, while not passionate, had the hint of desire. She pulled back when he rubbed his hand up her thigh. "No, not that. Not now. Let's just do a little bit more of this." Nick was frustrated but didn't let it show. This was real progress. So they spent a few more minutes kissing. Then, when it was heating up to the point of no return, Kimmy disengaged, apologized, and went to bed, leaving Nick alone again on the couch. He decided to switch on the television. As he reached for the remote, he heard a noise coming from the spare bedroom, which they had turned into a home office, because he sometimes worked remotely. He strained to listen. There it was again. A soft scraping. No, not scraping. A tapping. Like someone was typing on the keyboard of a computer. It wasn't Kimmy. She was in their bedroom. He stood and looked down the hallway. The office door was open, but the only light was a soft computer screen glow. He crept closer, peered inside, and his heart skipped a beat when he saw that the imp had returned. And it had changed. Its horns were now longer and twisty. Its eyes were no longer anime cute. They were smaller, darker, piercing. It still only stood 10 inches or so tall, but instead of having a pudgy belly, it was now rippling with muscle, and its skin had morphed from bright red to dark crimson and had taken on a leathery texture. Its fangs were thicker, sharper. It sat on top of his work desk in front of his open laptop. It leaned forward and used its black-tipped fingers to type on the keyboard. It noticed him when he peeked inside, and it looked up at him. It gave another wicked smile. Then it shot up, bounded off the desk, and straight at him. Nick's heart pounded as he jumped back into the hallway. "Shit!" he hissed. The imp ran toward the den. Nick grabbed a golf club from the bag that he kept leaning against his desk, and he gave chase. Kimmy stepped out of the bedroom with sleepy eyes. "Nick, can you tone it down? I'm trying to sleep." The imp jumped over the couch and was now standing on the coffee table. Nick stood with the golf club raised, ready to club the little demon. But it gave a malicious laugh, then blinked out of existence in a tiny puff of black smoke. Nick glanced back at Kimmy, saw that she looked concerned at his behavior. "Did you see it?" he asked. "See what?" she replied. Then her eyes shot wide. "The rat? Is it back?" "It's not a rat," he replied. "It's something different." Kimmy took a hesitant step closer and peered into the den. "Well, what do you think it was?" Nick lowered the golf club. He opened his mouth to tell her that he thought he might have been hallucinating, but was afraid to add to her burden. "I don't know, but it's gone." Mocha padded out of the bedroom and stood beside Kimmy. He cocked his head at Nick as if to say, "Get yourself together, douchebag. You're acting weird." Kimmy didn't like the idea that some critter might be in the house. She nervously glanced around, not sure what she should be looking for, and saw the light coming from his office. She stepped inside and said, "What the hell, Nick? What is this?" Her tone caused him to wince. "What do you mean?" he said, as he stepped into the room and switched on a lamp. Kimmy stood in front of his computer, her face angry and hurt. He looked at the screen and saw that the imp had pulled up a porn site. The images could never be described as romantic or beautiful. They were graphic and raw and animalistic. "Oh no, Kimmy, I didn't do that. That's not what I was looking at." Kimmy slammed the laptop shut. "Well, it sure as hell wasn't me, and you're the only other person who lives here. Honestly, Nick, you can't control yourself, can you? Why do you have to look at these perverted images? This isn't sex, Nick. It's terrible. It's gross." Nick shook his head. Confusion, disbelief, and anger flared up. "I didn't do it. I promise." "Then who did, Nick? Who else could it have been?" "I think my anxiety meds are messing with me," he blurted. "I think I'm seeing things, and if I did this, I don't remember." Kimmy pushed past him into the hallway. "You're seriously trying to blame this on your meds? To think I was considering us trying to be intimate again, but not now. You've ruined it. You disgust me." She snatched up Mocha and stormed into the bedroom and slammed the door shut. Nick heard the clack of the lock. He was furious. He was also scared. The imp was not a hallucination. It was real, though he didn't understand how. But he knew he had to kill it. He stalked back to the den. The only light was from a lamp, which left the corners dark with shadow. He switched on all the lights in the den and in the kitchen. Then he positioned a club chair from the den so that he could see into both rooms and down the hallway. He sat, golf club in hand, and watched for the imp as he tried to make sense of it all. As the night dragged on, he lost his battle with fatigue and fell into a deep sleep. He woke the next morning with Kimmy standing over him. She had showered and was dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. She had her purse slung across her shoulder. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Anywhere but here," she replied. "I can't be with you right now." He stood and reached for her, but she shrank away. When she opened the door and stepped onto the porch, he said, "Are you coming back?" She was tense, hurt, but there was also another energy coming from her, a dark energy, and it worried him. "Of course I'll be back," she spat, "after I calm down, because this is my home as much as it is yours. But when I get back, things are going to change, Nick. Do you understand?" "Kimmy," he pleaded, "hear me out, please. I don't know what's happening to me, but I wasn't looking at that site, I promise." "Get yourself together, Nick," she hissed. "I've got to figure this all out, but if I give you another chance, it will be the last. Do you understand me?" Before he could answer, she turned and stalked off the porch and got into her car and left. He stood there, mind swirling at how his attempt to heal their marriage was devolving into madness. Suddenly, from inside the house, Mocha growled and started barking. "Now what?" Nick said aloud. Then Mocha gave a terrible squeal that was choked off into a gurgling whimper. "Crap!" Nick said, and ran into the house. He shot down the hallway and pushed the door open and looked inside. The imp was back. Its horns were more gnarled, and it flicked a forked tongue between its black lips. It stood beside Mocha, who lay on his side in a spreading pool of blood. The imp was stabbing the poor dog with a razor-sharp paring knife that it had taken from the kitchen. Repeatedly, the blade sunk into Mocha's body with a wet thud. Nick stood in horror, his mind reeling at the gory sight. Finally, the imp rammed the knife into Mocha's throat and left it there. It looked at Nick and gave the hateful giggle of a hellish child. Then it snapped its fingers and disappeared into an oily black cloud. Nick sprang into action. He rushed into the room and knelt beside the dog. "No, no, no," he said. "Mocha, come on, boy, please. Don't be dead. Come on, boy." But it was clear that Mocha was gone. Nick dropped back onto his bottom and leaned against the foot of the bed. He raked his fingers through his hair as he tried to make sense of what was happening, why it was happening. Long minutes passed as his mind raced. Then he realized that he needed to deal with Mocha's body and clean up the mess before Kimmy got back. She would be devastated, and they didn't need this right now, not when everything else was falling apart. He would tell her that Mocha had gotten out of the house and was roaming free. He'd done it before, and this would buy him some time. He rushed into the kitchen, grabbed a black plastic trash bag, paper towels, and some cleaner, then back to the bedroom. Thankfully, the house had hardwood floors, and the blood was easy to clean up. He carefully placed Mocha's body inside the trash bag, then tossed in the bloody paper towels. He tied it up and took a moment to consider how best to get rid of the evidence. Nevermore Hollows was a coastal town that butted up against the Atlantic and was surrounded on 3 sides by Dunwich Forest, which seemed dark even on the brightest of days. He could either try to dispose of the body in the ocean, which he wasn't sure he could do without being seen, or he could take it deep into the woods and bury it. Burying it seemed to be the best course of action. He grabbed a small garden shovel that Kimmy had bought so that she could maintain the flower beds and quickly loaded it, along with Mocha's body, into the trunk of his car. Then he drove out of town, past Winona's Waffle Hut, and pulled off the road beside what appeared to be an old hunting trail. He took Mocha's body and hiked a 1/4 mile up the trail until he found a small clearing. He dug a shallow grave and placed Mocha's body inside. He tossed in a shovelful of dirt, and Mocha whined. Nick stumbled back, nearly fell, caught his footing, then felt an oppressive energy like nothing he'd ever experienced. It came from the garbage bag. It came from Mocha. He gripped the small shovel, preparing to use it as a weapon. Inside the bag, Mocha squirmed. Nick wanted to run, but was held in place by the oppressive energy. Mocha continued to squirm, and Nick realized the poor dog was clawing through the bag. Mocha's blood-matted head popped free, and he turned his death-clouded eyes onto Nick's. Then, Mocha began to whimper and gag, as if choking. Nick watched in horror as a tiny red hand, tipped with black claws, snaked from Mocha's mouth. It was the imp. It pulled itself out of the dead dog with a squelch, then stood defiantly before Nick. And the tiny creature had changed even more than when it had last appeared. It was more grotesque. It was hunched and leathery, its horns twisted and gnarled. It locked its hate-filled eyes on Nick. Nick heard himself groan, and his horror morphed into something much more profound. He felt soul-withering shame. He was finally able to break the spell. He dropped the shovel and ran back to the car. He shot back onto the county road and roared back into town. As he drove, his mind raced. He realized that he was crying. Is it all real, or am I losing my mind? He had stopped crying by the time he got back home, and he was thankful that Kimmy had not yet returned, which gave him time to figure out what exactly to tell her, whether he was losing his mind or the imp was real. She'd never believe him. So he decided to stick to the story that Mocha had run away. He'd tell her that he'd spent hours searching but had been unsuccessful. The story would hit Kimmy hard, but it was better than telling her the truth. He paced across the porch, nervously raking his fingers through his hair, feeling as if everything was spinning out of control. He was trying to focus on fleshing out his story when Kimmy returned home. She got out of her car and grabbed a handful of shopping bags, then stopped when she saw the look on his face. "What is it?" she asked. "You look terrible. Are you sick?" "Mocha's run off," he replied. She ran past him, dropped her bags onto the couch, and headed back out. "I've already been looking for him, Kimmy. He's nowhere to be found. You know he's run off a couple of times in the past and always made it back home, remember?" "But that was back in our apartment complex in Savannah," she replied. "He knew the area. This is a completely new town, Nick." "Okay, good point," Nick replied. He took a calming breath to steady his mind so that he could control the situation. "Then let's do this. We can make up a flyer, print off a stack, and start putting them up. But let's wait to see if he comes back tonight. Okay? If not, then we can start first thing in the morning." Kimmy was on the verge of tears when they stepped inside. She noticed Nick's laptop on the coffee table. "Did you already make the flyer? Can I see it?" Actually, I hadn't started, he said. I wanted to wait on you. I can't wait till tomorrow, Nick. Let's create one now, print off a few and put some up, at least in our neighborhood. She plopped down on the couch and keyed in the pin to unlock the screen, and then froze. Nick saw the disgust on her face, and his gut clenched. What is it now, babe? Kimmy pointed to the screen as she turned to look up at him. Her eyes were wide with shock, and her mouth hung open in disbelief. Nick looked and was sickened. The search browser showed images depicting violent sex. It wasn't the kind of consensual, mildly kinky sex play that normal couples would participate in. This was from the lowest pits of the dark web. Kimmy slammed the computer shut, shot up off the couch, ran to the bathroom, and vomited into the sink. Nick stood frozen, looking at the computer. Then he heard the imp's hellish little laugh. It came from the bedroom. He knew the little beast had done this, and he made up his mind that he was going to kill the bastard. "This stops now," he said aloud. He ran into the kitchen, snatched a steak knife from the counter, and marched down the hallway. He stepped into the bedroom just as Kimmy stormed out of the bathroom. "Don't go in there," she yelled. "You're not welcome in my home, and you will never be welcome in my bed ever again. Get out." Nick glanced around the room, looking for the imp. It was on the dresser, more gnarled and grotesque than ever. He rushed at it, the knife held high, but it jumped from the dresser onto the bed. Nick pivoted, keeping his eye on the creature, not wanting to let it out of his sight. Kimmy ran into the room in a rage, not seeing the imp was standing in the center of their bed. "Get out, Nick! Get out now!" She grabbed him by the arm and yanked him toward the door. He pulled free, stumbled, and reached out to steady himself on the footboard. In doing so, he dropped the knife. It clattered to the floor. Kimmy was in a rage. "I hate you," she screamed, and started smacking at his arms, his neck, and his face. The imp laughed. In her spiraling rage, Kimmy didn't seem to notice, or was somehow being spurred on by the hellish laughter. Nick pushed her back. She slammed against the wall. He snatched a knife from the floor with the intent to stab the laughing little demon as it danced in wicked delight in the center of their bed. Kimmy's eyes were wild with brokenness and hate. "How dare you push me, you pervert!" She shot from the wall and slammed into Nick's back, pushing him over the footboard and onto the bed. The blade was pointed up, and it sliced through his carotid artery. Kimmy had slammed into him with such force that she was unable to keep her footing and fell on top of him. The point of the blade slid into her right eye socket and sank deep into her brain. Blood covered the bed in shocking red sprays. Kimmy was dead, but Nick still had life, though he had less of it with each pump of his heart. He was able to roll, pushing Kimmy's body off him. He clapped his hand across his neck in a weak effort to stanch the spray of blood. He saw the knife sticking up out of his wife's face. Suddenly, he had a profound revelation. When he had felt shame at the shallow grave, it was because Mocha and the imp had looked upon him with judgment. They had cast their judgment upon him because of his act of betrayal. When he'd selfishly slept with Leela in the bed that he should have shared only with his wife, he had invited darkness into his marriage, which manifested itself in the guise of the imp. and as his heart stopped beating, he took his last breath and followed the demon's hellish laughter into the abyss.